You had enough rain this week? Well, let me open this up with a word of prayer and we'll get going here. Father, we thank you so much for the opportunities that we have before us. Each Sunday is a privilege and an opportunity for us to gather and to sing praises to your name, to open up your word, to try to understand more and more of who you are and your greatness. Father, as we stand here as finite beings, enjoying the grace and the mercy that surround our lives as a result of your Son and his work on the cross, we know that you would be just to dismiss us, but you, in your love for us and in your sovereign will, you have brought us to a place that we can be in right relationship with you because of your Son's righteousness imputed to each one of us. As we walk through this time this morning, may we learn more about how you have acted in the past and begin to anticipate what the future will look like. Thank you for these moments and how special and how much we can treasure them. And it's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen. Good morning, class. It's good to be here with you all this morning. We're going to be looking at really somewhat of a presentation. I do want you to ask questions as you need to, as you have things. You have a handout just to kind of help you follow along a little bit this morning. What we're going to wind up doing is we talked about the flood last week. This morning we're going to look at dinosaurs, and I'm going to be a little bit particular about what we do, but I do want to start this presentation just walking through some basics, some foundational understandings of why and how we interpret things like dinosaurs through a biblical worldview. As we push into next week, I want to begin to look and see how God utilizes the world, how he brought it into existence, but really how he uses it, the creation as a secondary means for us to see his hand upon it and even to judge the world so that we may feel that impact as well. And so we'll unpack some of that as we go. Our title today is Raising Ruth. Martha and I got to work on excavating an Edmontosaurus annectans, which is a duckbill dinosaur. This past summer, we had probably 65% of the skeleton. We took you all out to see that, didn't we? It's still in the ground. So you'll get to see the next stages of that. As we think about what we do each summer, we're out doing the work of paleontology, but we do so with a biblical worldview. We're mindful of how we engage with people and want to not just give them the information or the technical aspects of paleontology itself, but lead them to something grander, something bigger, something more. This is our museum up in Glendive, Montana. It is not close to anything on the planet. Is that about right, guys? It's the next biggest city is Billings, Montana, and that's still 3 hours away. So it is out in the middle of ranch and farming country, but it is, in its own way, has a very beautiful landscape to it. There's a little bit of isolation that we feel from being there all summer. I know when Martha and I get on the road, begin to come back, we're reminded of, wow, the world looks much different than it did the past 3 months in Montana. This is the inside of our museum here. This is the main exhibit hall. You see the dinosaur skeletons that are there on display. These are casts. They're based on original skeletons that were found and have been copied and completed. The big Tyrannosaurus Rex that you see there in the picture is named Stan. It was named after a man named Stan. And there was about 60 some odd % of the T-Rex that was discovered. And so through the process of casting fossils, they were able to complete it. And I believe we paid $125,000 for that. So they're not cheap. A T-Rex, in fact, actually, the Stan's original bones sold just a few years ago for $30 million. So it's an interesting field in which there is a lot of interest for this stuff. 25 years ago, it would have been a fraction of that. What we look at doing is we're working through excavation. Martha and I spend probably most of our time digging in the ground. I'm reminded of getting older, and sometimes I get older just as the summer unfolds. but we enjoy the young men in particular. The Haleys have been a great blessing to us amongst others. And so I enjoy growing in my ability to give instruction and point as I sit in my lounge chair with my lemonade and relax. I still work a little bit. Our work is excavation, as I mentioned. And so we're looking to go out and find the fossils. We're looking to begin to dig around the fossils and prep them for being moved from the ground. It can be a fairly tedious and slow-moving process. What we're looking to do is to assume that it's broken. If you've ever had a broken arm or a broken leg and been put in a cast, we're kind of dealing with it in that same fashion. As we begin to work and create a plaster jacket around it, we'll roll it over till we get to the other side, facing up, and then we'll carry it out and begin the process of preparation. Now, just by way of just kind of visually catching your eye, these two young men got to excavate a rib. Now, you see the larger picture to the right there. Can you see the fossil in the ground? In the center. I did put it in the center. I should have off-centered it and thrown you off a little bit more. But you begin to recognize how the color's the same, and often some of the textures can be similar. But what we tell people, what we're looking for as we're out walking, is we're looking for design. I know that rocks are very random, and sometimes rocks will catch your eye, but once you begin to get your mind trained for what you're looking for, and you begin to see that, this kind of thing right here would be fairly obvious. And this is a rib right here that these young men were working on. Now, if you know Martha, that looks appropriate right there. And she enjoys her detail work. But that's a Triceratops rib she's working on. The head of the rib had a lot of sulfur around it, and so it was very deteriorated. And so she spent a lot of time stabilizing it with glues and different materials, and then filling in the cracks with putty to help solidify it so that we could actually move it around a little bit and put it on display. I'm working on a Triceratops nose horn right here, the nasal bridge and the nose horn itself. And so what we're looking to do is, this particular one was set deeply in some rock. So we're going through the process of using some of our air-powered tools to excavate and remove the rock once we got back into the lab. As we get into the process of getting into the lab, we have tools such as micron blasters, air hammers that actually help get us right down to the details of the fossil. We're looking to remove every possible bit of sediment that's possible. And this particular tool right here is a micron blaster, and it uses baking soda. We can use other medium to actually force through the little pin to help clean it, but the baking soda seems to work best. And you're looking to remove sediment here through compressors. No, we don't use sand. It would be too abrasive. That's always the trick with a fossil. In fact, we just happen to have some fossils here. What a coincidence. This is a metatarsal. This is probably a duckbill dinosaur metatarsal bone. It's the long bone in your foot. This one needs more prep. You can see the putty that's been put in here to fill in the cracks. But this right here has had a lot of what we call PVA that's actually solidified some of the dirt to the surface. We would take this unit here that we're talking about and actually just put it into the micron blaster to actually just remove the material. But as we get into it, we're always mindful of the fact that that little skin layer on the bone called a periosteum is very thin. And so you can actually go right through the periosteum very quickly and very easily. And so it takes a lot of finesse. And so this can be a very slow, tedious process. Now, if you like just locking into a thing and just staying for hours, this is great. And if you like to kind of drop into your own little isolated world, one of the things I've enjoyed, though, as I see this, is I'm reminded of a couple of details. First of all, it's fairly flat on top. That tells me that you're going to have something else up here that's probably going to have some type of a rolling action. And you'll notice the rolling action down here. So there's another bone that would have sat right here. So you're probably, depending on which digit it is, you're going to have, what, 2 or 3 phalange bones that are going to run out to the toes. And so this would turn and sit probably at about a 45-degree angle in a normal posture. Toes are going to come out here, and then then you would have an astragalus sits up here, and the tibia and the fibula would extend up here. Now these animals, when they get really big, can be 5-6 tons. Now the size of this bone would tell me that's probably an animal that's at least half that, so it's not a huge animal. But what I give you all that detail to remind you is that we see the hand of God in his design work in all of this. And so this just isn't paleontology, but these are ways for us to understand and see how God's hand moves and has brought even these extinct creatures with such unique and exquisite detail into how they function and how they move. Any questions? Now this in the mic. Yes, sir.
I understand now, thousands of years and millions of years, there's a big difference.
There is a big difference.
You know what I'm getting, it's a big difference in that. And I believe we've been told by scientists in general, that some of the ones that are supposed to be millions of years that they discovered, isn't it true now they're finding some of those that they said with actual flesh material?
Yes.
Now, what is that? What is that showing? You know.
Okay, I understand.
I know what you'll say, but what's it showing to them as far as millions versus thousands?
There's a couple of things. One, first of all, they're not showing flesh in the standpoint of pliable skin per se, but you'll have what you might call mummified skin. We found a bone several years ago that had that interlocking material on the surface, but it was very decayed. They've dissolved dinosaur bones and found blood vessels, veins, stretchy blood vessels, red blood cells. They find collagen. They find bone cells. All of this is not fossilized. So to answer what you're driving at is, what does this suggest? Well, what we can recognize is because of the nature of being buried in the ground, things like this don't last millions of years, shouldn't last millions of years, just because of how soft and pliable it is. If you were to take an animal today and simply take its blood and put it out on a shelf, it's going to start breaking down immediately. And so what we recognize is if we take modern day processes and just see what just nature does to them today, they don't last. So why would you expect dinosaur fossils to do something different? So these kind of evidences tell us, at least point to a younger Earth, which is being consistent with the Genesis 1 narrative of life coming to existence over 6 literal days, or creation coming to be over 6 days.
How's this affecting their views? You know, maybe it's not millions. Are they?
Oh no, they're not doing that.
Oh, it's not.
No, it's not. They're not changing their mind at all. The basic narrative is we're now rethinking what is possible with the lifespan of fossilization. Yeah, they're not giving that up. Don't think that evidence is going to change their mind, because the evidence that changes their mind will affirm a biblical narrative, and if you affirm the biblical timeline and the biblical history, then you affirm a literal God and his literal judgment upon humanity. They're not going to go there. Now, the micron blaster here, every time I have this slide come up, I just like to watch it because I enjoy just sitting and being quiet here. Have we got the volume up, Kenneth? But as you see, just little bits of sediment are being taken. This is a T-Rex tibia, and we're beginning to work through the process of just taking the material off a little bit at a time. And in that, you see that brown, the darker brown, that's the periosteum layer. That's the stained color. That's not the color that the bone would have been when the animal was alive, but that's the staining because of the ground, the minerals in the ground in that area. We're in Hell Creek Formation is what this is called. I will want volume later if you can find it. Now, on your handout here, there are a couple of things I want to really point out to you. First of all, you've got to begin to understand how I process paleontology and how I wish all paleontologists processed paleontology. Part of it is there is the discipline of paleontology, but you wind up wearing several hats. Even if you wear them loosely, you're wearing several hats in the process. First of all, you're going to be part biologist. Because if I have a pile of dinosaur bones, I've never seen that animal alive, and so I don't know exactly how it functions. So I've got to go to living organisms that I can watch and observe them moving, see what they do, see how their muscles attach to bones, and make appropriate correlations back to the fossils. And this is what a lot of paleontologists are doing. So I have to understand just general biology. How do animals exist, move, and function? I have to be part geneticist. Not that I've got any depth in that field, but I need to recognize that there is a genetic code that is at the base of all living organisms, information that is driving how an animal looks and exists. Which tells me that while there is variation within a created kind, there is no evolution going on. There's no, should I say, no Darwinian evolution going on. One kind is not becoming another kind. And that's because the genetics restrict this kind of diversity. Genetics allows a little bit of diversity. The dogs become, for me, the easiest thing to recognize. How many of us have dogs in here? But they have such a great range of height and size and color and hair length and shape of face. But they're all what? They're all dogs. And so we see what's possible within the genetic code, but dogs are not becoming something else. And this Genesis 1 narrative in particular reminds us that God created life after its kind. And so it becomes that anchor point, that foundation for us to understand this. I had to be part geologist. I had to understand the part of the ground and how it functions, the layers, the stratified layers. I see evidence of water everywhere, but it's not just me that sees it. When you drive along an interstate and you've got the limestone cutout and you see the layers in the rock itself, there's only one mechanism that can bring that to be, and that's by moving water. You're seeing the presence of water when you see that. When you see a valley formed and a creek running through the valley, the creek did not form the valley. The creek is the leftover of a larger water feature that once flowed through here. And you're literally seeing the impact of water all over the planet. And that's part of geology. Part engineer, and I'll just touch on that just real quick, because I was just talking about the foot. I need to understand the mechanics. How do these things work? When you think of a muscle, you've got a muscle that's contracting. It's acting like pulleys and levers to bring function to our bodies. And finally, I have to be part historian. And I think this really becomes the real dividing point over if you will, a Christian paleontologist as opposed to a secular paleontologist. Because I start with the Bible's history as a foundation for my thinking. It becomes that anchor point for me to build everything upon. And without that, I am left to make some very large and grand assumptions. And this is what I see in secular paleontology, secular geology, as they create their own timeline. They create their own history. Because what we recognize is these fossils have some information to them, but no fossil tells me when it died, how it was buried. It doesn't include that kind of information. And so as the holder of the fossil, I'm left to be the one to interpret the history behind this particular fossil. And depending on whether I believe God created life over 6 literal days or the world is a product of 13.5 billion years of universe evolutionary processes, it's going to influence how I interpret that. You understand what I'm getting at? Any questions on any of that? Yes.
I considered the difference being macroevolution to microevolution. That is, we believe in micro, that there's diversity among species.
Mm-hmm.
Is it seeding, the left is experts at redefining terms or making up their own terms. Is it seeding territory to them to even use the word evolution when you're defining these things? I mean, is it helpful to break it up like macro and microevolution?
Since you know the pitfalls that are coming when you begin to go down that road, I find it is critical to be sure you're defining terms and clarifying them. What if I would just say the word evolution, we have negative connotations, don't we? But what if I told you that from the beginning of this church to today, that it has evolved over 25 years? Would that be an inaccurate statement? It wouldn't. But because of the connotations we have with it, we certainly reject that. Now, from the beginning of this church to today, it's correct to say it's evolved, but how has it evolved? What's changed? What's been the impetus behind that change? Understanding. You have people who are thinking and working. You have God leading them. You have intelligence. You have insight. You have thought. You have information. You have work. That's not what's happening in evolution. I read the material all the time, and you hear this. Well, the giraffe came along with a short neck and saw the leaves were high up in the air, and he just determined he needed to have a longer neck. And I mean, just only slightly facetious with that. But that's kind of the material and you recognize that their God is the nature himself. That's their God, is nature. But nature is not a thing. Nature doesn't think. Nature doesn't have information. Nature doesn't expand that way. So to answer your question, yes, I think it's helpful to have those. And if you don't get them clarified, or at least as you have conversations, you need to be listening for the shift. Because the proof of Darwinian macroevolution is the fact that microevolution exists. But that's a lie. And that's not the same thing.
So tell me, is there a better way that you would explain it? Because obviously Christianity in history has always sort of used that as a springboard to create its own linguistics or holiday, if you will. So is there a better way if someone comes at you with, well, this is just evolution, is there some way you would turn it to say, no, this is the flood, this is God's, have you come up with something that to counter?
With respect to what you're suggesting, I have tried to qualify my terms on the front end. So when I'm talking about an evolution that I would disagree with, I call it Darwinian evolution. If I'm talking about the variation within created kind or microevolution, I will actually say the variation within the created kind. I try to not use terminology depending on the audience that might be confusing in the process. So I'm trying to be mindful of that. And so it's helpful, even with geological time, we talked last week, and I gave you the geological column. There were names like Silurian and Devonian and Precambrian that are supercharged with deep time, hundreds of millions of years. But they're actually just names of rocks. So what I find is sometimes there's this tension is if I recreate my whole system, then nobody knows what I'm talking about. So I have to kind of borrow from the secular perspectives where appropriate and just kind of dance around the rest of it as best I can. How did dinosaurs come to exist? God created them. It's that simple. Nothing exists. We've talked before. I used this with some kids just the other day. It took them a minute to get it, but if you have an apple, where do the apples come from? Sarah, where do apples come from?
The tree.
The apple tree, exactly. And where do apple trees come from? You can't use God just yet. That's too early. Apple trees come from apple seeds. Apple seeds come from apples. Apples come from apple trees. You have this circle. The reason for the existence of any of those is not contained within the thing itself. Nothing explains itself, its origin. What we need is something non-physical, eternal, transcendent. We need something really, if you will, outside the physical reality. Can you think of anything that might qualify there? Yeah. And so just by the simple logic of causation, you recognize the necessity of God. But that becomes the unacceptable individual, the unacceptable personhood, which is why we don't know how old the earth is, we don't know how old the universe is, we have multiverses, we have all kinds of strange black holes, all kinds of strange ideas. Using the Bible to explain dinosaurs becomes critical. That becomes our foundation. The logical flow from that is, one, have dinosaurs always existed? They have not. Just because I just explained, they had to have an origin, a beginning. Logical flow, this is on your paper here. Dinosaurs are land animals. They're not flyers and they're not swimmers. Those are marine flyers and marine swimmers. Genesis 1 defines those three groups as major groups during the creation week. Land animals were created on the sixth day of creation. You can go to Genesis chapter 1, verses 24 and 25. Let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after its kind. So therefore, now we can make some logical deductions. If dinosaurs are land animals were created on the sixth day of creation, then therefore, when were dinosaurs created? Yes. What are we doing here? We're letting the Bible be what? Our foundation, our authority, our history. Science doesn't demonstrate this. This is not even the realm of what science actually attempts to even communicate. Although they would like you to think they can, and they do, science is not set up to deal with one-time origin events. It's a historic argument. It's not a scientific argument. This is not a rejection of science. What day was man created on? Day 6. So, did dinosaurs and man live together? And we're letting the Bible be our guide here. It pushes us forward. It gives us a launch point from which we can understand how to think. As we press into the flood narrative, we touched on this some last week. We recognize God, because of his judgment upon fallen humanity, told Noah to build an ark to preserve life. Fountains of the great deep broke open, and the windows of heaven were opened. And so when we have that foundation in place, we can begin to now ask questions like, how long does it take for fossilization to occur? Does it take millions of years? It doesn't, does it? In fact, time is really not the issue here when we talk about fossilization. Because we have a lot of animals, if you will, that die today, and are they now creating a whole new fossil record? They're not, are they? They're actually being destroyed and actually going away. And so what we need is to have right conditions, and this becomes critical. Even the secular paleontologists recognize this, but they're going to stretch these right conditions out over millions of years into isolated events. But when you recognize what the flood is doing, even in the vaguest of terms, you recognize something profound is happening across the planet. Therefore, when we look at the world, we ought to be able to see that and interpret what we see in light of the biblical narrative. So I believe I showed you this last week, but just by way of reminder. Yes, sir. The only reason we have fossils now, yes, is the flood. There will be probably some isolated situations where you might get something that could be fossilized, but when you begin to recognize the scope and the scale of fossils across the planet, literally there's limestone under these hills right here. We talked about this several times. we could probably go out and probably within the next 30 minutes find a fossil, marine fossils right here on this property. And then you begin to recognize that all of Tennessee is like this, and all the South is like this. We're actually living on a graveyard. So it's the scope and the scale requires more than just these little isolated events. Now, do I think the water table could? No, because what we need is something that bears sediment up and creates a massive burial process. Could you get something in an isolated area on the edge of a river? You might be able to get a few things like that, but you've also got a lot of tumultuous waters that may upheaval it shortly thereafter. In fact, we keep a teddy bear at the museum, don't we? Or at least used to. We got a little stuffed animal that somebody sent us, and they dropped it into chemicals for like 3 days, and it came out and solidified its fossil. I've seen pictures of old water mills where the water, apparently the content of the water solidifies and just encases the water mill with rock. You think about stalactites and stalagmites, they're always growing. And these are all rapid processes that are happening literally right before our eyes. Mm-hmm. Oh. Did y'all want those? Yeah, those. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. That's what happens when I don't put an underline on my slide. So you should have rapid burial, infiltration, and I think extended. Okay. All right. Now, just by way of just reinforcing the biblical narrative here before we transition, is just reminded that the Genesis 7 talks about how the fountains of the great deep were open, the floodgates were open, the flood came upon the earth, water multiplied, water prevailed and multiplied greatly, water prevailed more and more, the high mountains were all covered, under the heavens were covered, the water prevailed, mountains were covered, and the water prevailed. What is the text been trying to communicate to us? Lots of water. It's clear, isn't it? Yeah, and so we see that, and we ought to be able to see evidence of such a thing. We have uplift in Montana, where we have layers, the stratified layers. This anticline brought the fossil-bearing layer that we dig in to the surface. And so we could probably go miles east or west from where we dig and go down 1,000 feet and find more dinosaur fossils. But it's hard enough to find them when they're on the surface, not let alone going down 1,000 feet. And so this is why we dig where we are. This is Ruth. She may not make a lot of sense to you at this point, but what you're seeing in the upper left-hand corner is the tail. Across the bottom are legs. You may see ribs in toward the upper right, part of the hips. And she is, while she's somewhat disarticulated, she's actually all together. And it's really quite fascinating that we found her as complete and together as she is. This is what she would have looked like alive, or at least her overall skeleton. You see variations of duck-billed dinosaurs. You may be familiar with the Parasaurolophus on the bottom left-hand picture. This is the skull of the Edmontosaurus. You see interesting detail where teeth, it would have been a battery of teeth, certain openings that would have been, let's see, the eye would have been in this opening right here. This is the nasal passage of the nose where you would have respiratory turbinates that would have helped capture moisture and reinfuse it into the air as it breathed. This is the overall area. This is immediately right close to where we were digging. So you get a sense of the fossils. we find fossils down low and we find them up high. If you notice the little white patch in the upper left-hand corner up high in the hill, that's part of a triceratops up there. We've not gotten to work on that. It's been in the ground for a couple of years. We're actually on a ranch owner's property here. This is the view of our site here. You can see us gathered around the dig site. This is what we're looking at as a floodplain. So you've got hills on either side. They're very stratified hills on either side, which means they're layered, which again is evidence of water. The floodplain in the middle is again telling us we see water had moved through here in a very large fashion in the past. This is me with one of our grandsons, giving him a closer look here, get a sense of what's going on. As we begin to get into Ruth, we're beginning to ask questions about how is she so put together in light of so much water moving through this area. Now, when I talk about water in this instance, I'm really probably talking about something that happened well after the flood. This is not immediate flood impact, at least as far as it coming through the floodplain. So I've been asking the question, what's keeping the skeleton together? And I'm thinking there might have been some soft tissue, ligaments, tendons, skin, muscles that might have remained for an extended amount of time as she was getting buried and as she was getting moved. And then once she got to her final resting place, then it finished its decay process. We begin the process of creating a grid, and Martha takes care of drawing up the pictures, putting the bones in place. It helps us to kind of understand what we have. It helps us to remember what the orientation of the bones were, so we can be sure that we know how they fit together. And so we're stringing this across. That's Joshua Haley, by the way. And this helps us kind of see when we begin to reassemble things, what's missing, what's not missing. Now, when I think about Ruth, I think about Tinker Toys. Y'all done Tinker Toys. I assume we're in a Tinker Toy age group, right? And if you took them and you just dumped them out, they're all kind of mixed together. See, when we got there, I thought, we're going to dig this bone, and this bone in this very order. And then you get there and you recognize you dig down and it's actually underneath another one that you couldn't see. And so they're really quite tightly twisted. And so you really had to work through the logistics of what's going to go when and how. And you just work the process. We started with this tibia fibula right here. This was on the edge of the site. We began to expose the sediment more and more. And once we got that sediment opened up, it's sitting on little pedestals of dirt. And we begin to wrap it in foil and then cover it with plaster strips. We dip burlap bags into straight up plaster. And we get it real nice and gooey. It's a lot of mess, and we enjoy, once we're done, pounding each other's shirts and making more of a mess as we go. You start packing it down. I'm pausing because I'm thinking we're missing some pictures here. I don't think everything translated. So as we begin to kind of just mash it in and to the contour of the bone, and once we get it all covered, we'll eventually let it set up. It usually takes anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. And then once we do that, we can begin to think about rolling it out. And that's our first bone jacket that we took out right there. And what we'll do is we'll break the ground, roll it forward, and the side that was in the dirt becomes exposed, and we take that back to the lab. Now, once we get it back to the lab, we begin to clean it up a little bit, try to figure out what's broken, what's not broken. We didn't get it out of the jacket. It's still in the jacket as of right now. But the goal is to take all of these cracks, glue them well, put putty as necessary, and to try to get it as one solid piece, because the goal is to actually stand it up in the museum by pieces of iron, actually going through the process of welding and bending metal to actually put it into little saddles so we can create it in a lifelike position. This is the what we call the sacrum. These are the hips right here. Now, do you have volume? These are better with volume. Let me just roll with this first one here. Now that one was fairly light. That was probably maybe 150 pounds. We had some that would get up 350, 400 pounds, which was nice to have everybody there. And we're going through that process on all of them. Well, I got another one to be coming. And this, as we start opening things up, we are able to get to new spots and start working on different sections. Martha and I wind up helping other people, and we rarely actually get to do this together. And so this was fun. So that's why we did that picture together. And no, I did not put my hands on her back, did I? You're about the only one I probably wouldn't do that with. We do indeed. I apologize because some of these pictures did not translate here. This is the site. As you can see, we're getting down towards the end. A lot of things left. That's the rib cage, basically, and the humerus, which is the upper arm, that are still there. And we're thinking that this area is going to produce a lot of fossils, more than what we've even discovered. And so we're just talking about what the landscape might produce, what else might be there. We have a way of dreaming quite a bit when we're on the site, just hoping that there are dozens and dozens of skeletons for us to work on. But that's, you got to be thinking that, because that's what we do, is we're out there looking for this process to unfold before us. Yes?
So as you expose that, here, weather is taking its toll on those bones. Now it's washing away some of the dirt, but will it ruin the fossil before you get back?
As far as we knew, we got all of that skeleton out. So we did not leave any bones in the ground. The other one, the Triceratops that was on the hill, is covered by a tarp. And there's always that possibility that whether the water...
Once they're exposed, then they will start to...
Yeah, they're vulnerable that way. Because what's happening is when they're in the ground, there's moisture in them. And so once they start to dry out, they become brittle. And so that becomes a problem. And if they get wet and get into the freeze-thaw cycle, they'll start breaking apart. We've come across bones that have been exposed to the surface that are just in hundreds of pieces. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. On occasion, yeah, that's a good question. On our site, not on this particular spot right here, we find, Martha's found little ribs. She likes the little bitty stuff. And so we'll find fish vertebra, little ribs. We found jaw pieces. What else? Yeah. Teeth as well. Yeah. Turtles, we've got 3 or 4 different species of turtles that we find. We've got crocodilians, which we'll find. We think we've got crocodiles, gators, and what we would call, it's a champsosaur of the fossil record, but it's a gharial. It's that really slender ball on the end. We've got that. And so what's interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because we find these fish, turtle, crocs, and you can actually correlate them directly to what we see today. In fact, we bought an alligator skull, a modern skull, to use as a comparison when we find a piece of gator skull that we can now say, okay, oh, that goes here. Now, if that's 65 million years old, so that's what we're digging in is, air quotes, 65 million year old fossil record. but there's been no evolutionary change. We can take a modern example and compare it to what we're digging out of the ground. Of course, we don't really expect any significant change, and we don't see that time frame in place. So, good question. Let me make sure. Now, we're working on the tail here. The tail, we've got about 14 vertebrae of the tail section. This is not the tail. Oh, I didn't bring it in. Yes, Jason has expanded our horizons on that, hasn't he? This is a Triceratops thoracic vertebra here. What's interesting with vertebra is if you just say you had 5 of these in a row, stacked identical, what's going to be in between any 2 of them? You're going to have a disc in here, aren't you? You see the hole right here, the top? What is that? Spinal cord, exactly. It's called the neural canal. This little piece right here is called a zygapophysis. There's actually another one that sits here. And then on the other side is the mate to it in the opposite direction. And so you get a little bit of mechanical fastening here. And then you're going to have the spinous process that's going to come up probably in this neighborhood. And all of this has muscle and tendons integrated in here. I say all that to say is you recognize that even though I'm holding bone, you recognize the necessity of all the soft tissue that was once here. And so you can begin to kind of envision what's going on. And you're reminded that as much as this is just a simple bone, this was once inside of an animal that walked around on the face of the planet. And it's kind of fascinating when you begin to process all of that. So when I think about this tail that I was talking about, you begin to see this series of articulation. You begin to see the life that existed there. The videos didn't come through because this is, I apologize, these videos didn't come through. I had a few videos that I wanted to share with you of us loading this stuff. Here's one of them. Let's see how this one does. And then we had to kind of create a makeshift straps and boards to carry it out. Let's see what else we got here. Oh no, this is the one I was hoping that was in here. What I want you to hear is the grunt we collectively make. This was probably easily 350 pounds. It's where you're thankful for other young men to come along and help. No, we did not. Let's see what else we got in here. Here's this loading it. You see it going down? I wanted to go further with it, but I could tell all of us collectively collapsing under it. Oh, yeah. It was so convenient that this dinosaur died right by the side of the road. I can't tell you how convenient that was. The Lord in His providence and His wisdom said, here's good. Because literally, now that looks like to you just like a dirt road. That's actually a county highway. Okay? Just remember where you are here. And so we were right by the road here, and that was really convenient. The ground was easy to work in, and so It made the process a whole lot easier. The Triceratops up on the hill would be a whole different kind of process of just taking, imagine trying to take that kind of load down a hill. The ranch got into they found a Triceratops skull 5 years ago, almost complete. Plaster and everything on it was probably minimum 2,500 pounds, one piece. And they had to roll it down the hill. They had a winch system. First of all, it was in a hole, they had to get it out. And then they had to anchor it up high and then slowly winch it down the hill. Because there was no carrying that. You can't get enough people around it to make that functional. Is that what you were referring? They actually looked into that seriously, and it was going to be like $20,000, and it wasn't worth it. They are looking for a Tyrannosaurus Rex. That's their payday. And Triceratops skulls are a dime a dozen, apparently. And so if it rolled down the hill and broke, they were okay with it. I'm like, no! This is the rib cage. This is one of our I think this is our last flip. We call this the dollhouse because of the framing that we put on it. And so you're just literally just manhandling it, you know? You're just going through the process of hoping nobody gets hurt and why you need a lot of people doing it. And you try to anticipate and plan as best you can. Yes, sir.
How do you go about claiming a site, or who's got access to it? Free for all?
No. The ranch owns everything. They know they have fossils there. And so we have a relationship with them already. The way the deal works is if we excavate something, we would split it. So if the dinosaur were worth $100,000, we would have 50 of value. We went ahead and purchased their part, and so we own the skeleton completely now.
When you say we,
The museum, not we, not this we.
So are there other people on the ranch? Or, 'cause you said they found a Triceratops skull years ago.
The ranch owner takes people out to look for bones. That's part of their living. So they're trying to maximize their property. I think they call it land, cash poor and land rich. And so they try to find ways to do that. And along the way, they find skeletons and they'll look to sell them. This is us unloading the tail section here. Nothing special here other than I just wanted you to see the system that we use to try to get it off. And we didn't drop it, so I'm thankful for that. How do we move it? We've got a green heavy-duty luggage cart, and so we carry it through the museum like that and then just put it into the exhibit. This is a close-up video of the tail section once it's been exposed a little bit. You see the vertebra, the different processes that are there. I just see hours of work when I look at it. That's all I see. I'm like, that's a lot. I couldn't, by myself, I couldn't do that in a month. If I worked 5 days a week, I couldn't do that. It'd probably take a month. Yeah, it could be. If I've got even that much time. You, Steve.
Guys are up there. Heavy weights.
Mm-hmm.
How many of you got a hernia?
No reported hernias to date. How about that? Depends on what mood I'm in. Yeah, because you can mess it up pretty easily and you can break it pretty easily, there's a lot of fragile stuff in there. and the quality of what we want it to look like when we're done. But Joshua Haley's done a real good job with it. So it's kind of like, I like to be able to train people on simpler things. Dina, I know you all didn't work on anything larger, but you had stuff you all excavated and worked on. And I like to have people to work on their things. But there's still,
So this one is all yours.
I will probably get a little bit of help, yes, but yes, which is hard because we don't have that much time to spend with it. Just a few last things. We're just about done here. Just so you know, as you're looking at the bones, we alluded to this earlier, there are things they can tell from it as they look into the bones themselves. And so we had two people that wanted to get portions of the skeletons for additional testing for their own individual creation science work. And so we gave them a piece of the jaw. And then I hate doing this. I still cringe when I look at it. I had a drill that I was driving into the bone. And so it was like, oh no. But I think it's going to really be a good thing, because part of what we hear at the museum is, so you all believe in the Bible, therefore you don't do science, which is so not true. And so this is an opportunity for us to be working in conjunction with other ministries and other scientists to actually do creation work and actually say, here's what the evidence says, and follow that evidence. And so we were glad to be part of that process. And I won't show that. No hernias, we're done here. And we're good. So let's just conclude here. I hope this was beneficial to you. I know a lot of you probably have heard me say some of this stuff a half dozen times. But I find that some of us are new here, and sometimes it's nice just to be encouraged along the process, to remember that the Word of God is true, that we can stand upon it as our foundation and our authority in not just dinosaurs, but in all areas of life. Father, thank you so much for allowing us to gather this morning. Thank you for blessing us with these moments. Thank you for teaching us and helping us to see and understand and comprehend not just your creation, but in turn, you as well. And it's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen. You're welcome to come by and take a look at some of these bones if you want to.